Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals. Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals.
Hey people, welcome to Knowing Animals. My name's Siobhan O'Sullivan and I do like knowing animals. This episode of Knowing Animals is from our Protecting Animals series, where we talk to animal advocates, past and present, about the work they do for animals. Now, this episode of Knowing Animals is brought to you by ASA. ASA is the Australasian Animal Studies Association. ASA is a fantastic organisation. I'm a member of ASA. It costs me 50 Australian dollars a year, but that's because I'm waged. It's even cheaper for unwaged people. ASA exists to support animal studies scholars in their work, and you should think about supporting them by becoming a member. That's ASA, the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Well, this is a super special episode of Knowing Animals. This episode is coming to you on Christmas Day. It is dropping on Christmas Day. It is not part of the regular series. It is coming midweek. And the reason I'm doing this episode is that in the minds of many people, this time of year is a time for sharing, for giving, certainly a time for spending money. Unfortunately for the non-human animals, it's also often a time for eating them. But as we're in this holiday period and we're thinking about giving and making a contribution, I wanted to have a talk to someone who spends her whole life giving to non-human animals, and also talk about something that she needs the community's help with in order to make the world a better place for the animals. So this week, on this very special Christmas Day episode, I'm joined by, this is the point where I realise I don't know how to say people's names, but anyway, I'm joined by Naty Guerrero-Diaz. Can you say your name, Naty?
Naty Guerrero-Diaz.
Guerrero-Diaz. Now, Naty is one of the 3 co-founders and also owners and also workers of Big Sky Sanctuary. Big Sky is an animal sanctuary in Victoria, Australia. It's currently home to around 90 animals, a lot of different species. And now, Big Sky was founded by Naty and also Mel and Penny. And in this episode, Naty, on behalf of all the owners, is going to tell us about her work for animals, her transition from an urban-based activist to someone who owns and runs and dedicates herself to living among rescued animals. And we're also going to talk about, as I mentioned, the ways in which you can help support Big Sky Sanctuary at this time of giving. Welcome to the podcast, Naty.
Thank you.
Okay, Naty, tell us, how did you get involved in animal protection? What inspired you?
Look, I think I've always had a very strong sense of justice, and working to protect animals, or at least working to change the way that we relate to non-human animals, is something that has evolved in my thinking from thinking about other types of social justice issues. So really it's an extension of thinking about justice more broadly in the way that everyone kind of communicates and relates to each other.
Well, Naty, I've known you for about 10 years, believe it or not, but of course many listeners won't know your work. So can you tell us a little bit about what your life was like, say, 10 years ago, living in Melbourne, the kind of work you were doing for animals then?
Sure. So look, I am a lawyer by trade and training, and that's what I practice in. And I went into law, again, thinking about this idea of social justice and kind of broader justice issues. And I didn't really think at the time about animal or non-human animals specifically. But as I said, it's evolved in my thinking. So 10 years ago, I was probably not really thinking directly about justice for non-human animals, although I was thinking about my interactions with animals and things like becoming a vegetarian and then eventually becoming a vegan was part of that thinking. About probably not quite 10 years ago, one of the co-founders, Mel, and I decided to open a vegan cafe, and that was as part of trying to address this issue with the way that humans relate to non-humans. And so we conceived of it as not just a cafe, but also a space for activists to come and recharge and kind of converse with each other, and to try and, I guess, create some kind of community around Melbourne. And I think we achieved that for a period. And then that project kind of evolved into creating an animal sanctuary where, again, the ethos behind it is not just about addressing the human-non-human relationship, but addressing more broadly the issues of social justice and the issues of how we all interact with each other and the way that we hurt each other, be it humans against humans, humans against non-humans, and that kind of humans against the environment and that sort of thing.
So the cafe I remember very well, very fondly, and there'll probably be quite a few listeners who also went down to Las Vegan during that time, and it was a very effective space for animal advocates. So can you tell us something about the process of, I'm just thinking to myself, I think perhaps a lot of listeners could imagine what it might be to open a cafe, a vegan cafe, but perhaps it's a little bit more difficult to imagine what it might be to have your own sanctuary. So can you tell us a little bit about the process you went through to obtain and establish the sanctuary, and perhaps some of the key lessons along the way?
Sure. So, look, I've got to be honest and say that the sanctuary and moving, I guess, the project, the broader social justice project from a cafe to a sanctuary wasn't really that well thought out. It was kind of almost an accident that we did it. So it was just, we were at a point where Mel and Penny and I were... we thought that we had achieved what we wanted to achieve with Las Vegan, and that project was kind of finishing. And we wanted to move to a different type of space and creating a different type of community. And this, Penny was just kind of going through Facebook, I think, and she saw somebody post an ad about this space that was being sold. So a house with 42 acres in Strzelecki, which is the traditional land of the Gurnai people of the Kulin Nation in South Gippsland, what's known now as South Gippsland. And we kind of looked at it and said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And literally that's how quickly it happened. We went down there, we saw the property, we kind of pooled our resources, bought the property, and then kind of thought, oh, now we've got a sanctuary.
So I was lucky enough to visit quite early on, and I think perhaps when I was there it was dominated by cats and dogs, which are the animals that perhaps you were most used to living with, and certainly the animals that I'm most used to living with as an urban dweller. But of course now it is home to a lot of other animals. Can you tell us a little bit about the animals that are there and how they find their way to you?
Sure. So we have lots of different types of animals who've come to us through lots of different ways. Initially, I think the animals who came to us were, or the first residents of the property were animals that we already lived with. So they were our kind of pets, if you like, if you want to use that term. But our companion animals in the city came to live with us there. And then we were approached by various different animal activist groups or animal rescue groups saying, can you take on this individual or this other individual? And so we kind of found ourselves getting lots and lots of residents first up initially through that process. We also have some residents who have come to us through other ways. So they've been living at other sanctuaries and those sanctuaries have shut down, or where they've been living with human companions and those companions can no longer care for them. So they're kind of, I mean, I don't like the word surrender. It sounds kind of like, it sounds very proprietary, but that's kind of what's happened. So people have just approached us. But now we're at a point where we are really at capacity, both in terms of space and in terms of resources. And so we're not actually looking to take in any more animals. We're trying now to move to a stage now project that is about consolidating the work that we've done so far, really establishing ourselves as kind of an environmental and a community space that is positive and productive and welcoming of both humans and non-humans, and we're at a point where we're really just trying to be more sustainable. And that kind of brings us to the project that I want to talk about, which is that we're now looking at placing another dwelling on the property. And that other dwelling is actually a house that's been donated to us by some donors in the local area. It's a removable house, and we're trying to raise funds to pay for the relocation costs. So that's obviously quite a large amount of money that we need to raise. We need to raise $45,000. And we're hopeful that once we've got that money and we can relocate this house onto the property, we will have 2 dwellings, which means that we'll be able to have more live-in volunteers, more live-in carers of the human kind, and hopefully we'll be able to care for more non-human animals and create a community that is interspecies.
Wonderful. So this episode is coming out on Christmas Day, and if I've understood correctly, you have till March to raise the funds. If people are listening and they feel that this is something that they'd like to support, how would they make a donation?
So we've set up a GoFundMe page, or rather the donors of the house have actually set up a GoFundMe page for us. We've shared that link on our Facebook, which is Big Sky Sanctuary Inc. On Facebook, and we also people can also just make donations directly into our bank account. So the bank account name is Big Sky Sanctuary. The BSB is 033262, and the account number is 419195. And we welcome all types of donations, be they small or big.
And so I'll put those details up on the episode link so people can go and have a look there. And can they also email you if they want to make a donation but they're a little bit unsure about how to work with those details you've just given?
Absolutely. They can email us at bigskysanctuaryinc@gmail.com. So all one word, bigskysanctuaryinc@gmail.com.
Right. So if you get the house and you can afford to move it, that means more people can come and help and volunteer. Why is that important to have more people, more capacity to house humans on the land?
Well, it's important for 2 reasons. The main reason for us is that the project of having a sanctuary and kind of establishing this space is really about building community. And so we're really interested in building a community that is bigger than just the 3 of us. We, of course, have volunteers and they've become part of our community, and we're trying to build an interspecies community where we have, we have lots of people, be they human or non-human, interacting and living in this land and creating a community that is, I guess, more like the kind of place we want to live in. The second reason is just purely practical. If there are more hands on deck, so to speak, then there are more non-humans that we can take in.
So if someone's listening to this episode and they're thinking to themselves, gee, Naty and Mel and Penny, they're living the dream, they're living my dream, and they think, I really do want an animal sanctuary, what would be your top tips of stumbling blocks to try and avoid?
Look, I think if somebody wants to start an animal sanctuary, I think that's great, and they should certainly do that and look at ways of doing that. Probably plan it a little bit better than we did. We kind of learnt on the fly. I think if you have the desire to do that, perhaps spend the time volunteering at an animal sanctuary. I know of lots of sanctuaries, including ours, that take live-in volunteers for a long period. So think about taking maybe 4 or 6 weeks to volunteer at an animal sanctuary so that you can get past that initial stage of isn't this great and actually get really used to the daily grind, because it is difficult. It's difficult work, it's very physical work, and it's very emotional work, and I think people don't necessarily realise that. So that would be my top tip. Volunteer, spend the time.
Right. Now, this episode is coming out on Christmas Day, but we're recording it at a conference at the University of Wollongong, Animalades. I keep mispronouncing it, but I mispronounce everything, so it's I'm at least consistent, right? And there's a lot of talk here about sanctuaries and the role of sanctuaries and animals on sanctuaries. And one of the things that you've been chatting to me about, between times is what it's been like to get to know the animals. Can you say something about how your perception of non-human animals has changed since you've had the opportunity to live among animals?
Yeah, look, one of the things that I have really enjoyed, and I think Mel and Penny would agree, is the fact that we get to know individuals over a long period of time, and that is really rare, I think, for city-dwelling advocates, other than, getting to know their own companion animals. But I think it's really important, if you are advocating for animals of other species, to have some real lived experience with those animals and those individuals, because we often see those individuals being portrayed in a very simplistic or kind of two-dimensional way, in the sense that we either see, for example, the cute pictures of tiny pigs jumping around and being really cute, or we see pictures of the horrors that the animal agriculture industry inflicts on them, but we don't see anything in between. We don't see the complexity. We don't see their individuality, their own personalities. We don't see that, and I think that experience really has enriched our lives, and it has enriched our understanding of who it is that we're sharing our lives with, and who it is that we're building community with. I feel like that is very, very important, particularly for those who claim to advocate on behalf of those animals. Wonderful.
Well, Naty, I ask everyone who comes on Knowing Animals to answer 5 quick questions. Are you ready for your 5 quick questions?
Yes.
Can you recall when you first started to think that there was something wrong or problematic about the human-non-human animal relationship?
Yes, I can actually. It's a very vivid memory. I was 4 or 5, probably 5, I'd say. And I was woken up in the middle of the night by my mum because our companion dog, a little Pekingese dog, was about to give birth. And Mum woke me and my sister up so that we could help her. And it was wonderful. I still remember it very vividly, watching our dog. Her name was Lolita, and she gave birth to 4 pups, and we had to help her because she was struggling quite a bit, so we actually had to physically assist. And Mum was so respectful and just so, I guess she was just so, how can I say, it was such a special moment, in the sense that she was just acknowledging that relationship between Lolita and her pups and that mother.
Empathetic?
Yeah, it was an empathy, I guess, but that a real respect and reverence of that mother-child relationship that this dog had with her pups. And it was in that moment that I realised, I guess probably as an adult now looking back, that I realised that actually that was quite rare, having an adult recognise that relationship that didn't involve humans, that is a relationship between Lolita and her pups. And really that's, I think, what set me off in thinking about animals in a different way.
Goodness, wonderful. So can you recall the first thing you did to try and bring about change for animals?
I really can't, and I was saying this to you earlier, but I'm a bit old now. I'm a woman of a certain age, and of course that means that my memories of my kind of early encounters with animals are very far away now. I really can't. I think really starting to change my own behaviour, so no longer eating animals, for example, no longer consuming their bodies, is something that I think is probably the starting point. I know a lot of people feel like going vegan is kind of the end point of a journey, but actually I think that's got to be a starting point of a longer journey. And for me, I think that's right. That's probably the first thing.
Wonderful. So if you had to name one animal advocate who's had a big impact on you, who would it be?
there's a lot of animal advocates who I admire and who have done lots of really good work. And of course, my thinking has also changed over time. So there's different animal advocates that have come in and out of my thinking. In terms of the work that we do now, I think Patrice Jones and the work that that they're doing at Vine Sanctuary is really powerful, and it's something that we look to quite closely because it's the kind of model that we wish to replicate. So it's been amazing at this conference to be able to meet her and speak to her. And in fact, we had a separate kind of more private session yesterday with Patrice and some other animal sanctuary owners talking about sanctuaries specifically, and that was a wonderful experience. So I think her work is it.
Oh, great. Wonderful. So what's the most important thing animal advocates can do for animals?
Look, I think getting to know them as individuals, interacting with individuals, and really getting to know not just the cutesy kind of way that we perceive animals, particularly farmed animals, or not just the horrors that we see through the animal agriculture industry, but getting to know them as they are, complete persons, people with complexities, with with personalities, people who might be not very pleasant at times or incredibly pleasant at other times. Really getting to know the animals you advocate for, I think that is really important, because that has brought to us, at least at the sanctuary, just a richness to the way that we can advocate.
So, Naty, if you had the power to change one thing about the human-non-human animal relationship, what would it be?
That's not a quick question. I'm not sure.
The question was quick. The response may take a little bit longer.
If I could change one thing. Look, I mean, power and control, I think, is probably the thing that needs to change. And that's that's obviously huge, and there's whole bodies of academic work that deal with that issue. But I guess a practical thing is I think centering the animal in the advocacy or centering the animal in the relationship would be a great starting point. I hate to think that animals are being used as commodities in a different way. So commodities to, for example, further people's own wish for social media notoriety or
podcast topics.
Yeah, perhaps. But I just wonder whether we can question or really examine who's being centered in those relationships, because I feel like it's very one-sided. It's really human-centric.
Okay, very, very important issues for us to reflect on. And Naty, what are you working on next?
Well, like I mentioned, our next project is to try and get this property onto get this house, this dwelling onto the property, because it's just, I feel like it's the next step in our quest for community building, and it's going to be an amazing resource. I feel not just for the sanctuary, but actually for the community that surrounds and that makes part of that sanctuary. And people who are listening, whether they be in Victoria close to us or whether they be elsewhere in the world, are absolutely welcome to join our community. And you can join our community by following us, by interacting with us, by reading about our residents and those who make up our community, and also, of course, by assisting us financially or through other means if they can.
And we should add that no one need worry that the money will not go to good use. That specifically at the minute you're trying to raise $45,000 to be able to relocate the house, but there's certainly ongoing costs always with food, veterinary care, etc., etc. So people should feel free to give what they can, knowing that it will certainly go to the animals and to the work you're doing.
Absolutely. Our vet costs are by far the greatest expense that we have, even having done lots of capital work. So even with fencing and fixing sheds and building shelters, the costs actually of our veterinary care just dwarfs that by huge amounts. We have, as you said, close to, or just over 90 community members. I think about 18 of those are bovine community members, and they have huge amounts of vet care that they require. We have sheep, 32 sheep, who also require, a lot of care, not just veterinary care, but also maintenance in terms of shearing. We have 7 pigs, and geez, they eat a lot.
It's not just the humans.
It's not just the humans. So pigs have a huge kind of costs associated with their care, food and veterinary care. The veterinary care for pigs is very specialised and is very difficult because they are a very strong-willed and physically strong individuals, and so it's very difficult to try and provide them with veterinary care, and for that reason we need to get specialist vets out. And of course we have 2 horses. Again, they chose us really in terms of how they came to the sanctuary. They kind of just turned up on our doorstep, and there's veterinary and other types of care associated with their rearing, as well as the 30-something roosters that we have.
Wonderful. Okay, so instead of buying those chocolates for Nana or the bottle of rum for Dad, think about, in this holiday season, about making a donation to Big Sky Sanctuary. You can find them very easily online just by putting Big Sky Sanctuary into Google. Thank you so much for joining us, Naty, and thank you to the listeners for joining us for Knowing Animals, a podcast where we talk to animal studies scholars and animal advocates about the work they do for animals. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan, and I do like knowing animals.